Since I think there are a lot of measures, actually the pandemic not only affect the economy, it affect the social and everything of the community. But when it specifically comes to the economy, I believe, it affects both the supply side, the demand, and all the financial aspect also. So I believe, the governments need to first understand what does really it affects in, different country, it has different impact. And in this regard, in our case, I can cite some of the, impacts, economic impact on the food security that we are facing. Most likely for Africa, it's unique because, as you know, the pandemic is multidimensional. And when you come to the African situation, more than 18%, in some cases, in our case, more than 18% have a multi-diversity poverty, and like 22% is in extreme poverty. The vulnerability is there, the context is very different. And it hits the country like Africa more than the other developed nations. This is how we can understand in our case, and to act on that. The first thing I believe is we need to understand the context and the vulnerability so that we can verify the impact of different country. In our case, what we make is, we make food security the whole government response. That's the way we are approaching, whenever you talk about the health, no food, no health. We have to interlink the issue, and also after COVID response, what will be created. The third issue which we are focusing on is all about the planning. The proper planning also matters. I think it works for any country which is affected by this pandemic. But the planning must be a unique one, and it should not be a business as usual. It must be a participatory planning between the regions and the federal government, and the need to identify the short-term intervention and long-term intervention as well. In our case, that's how we are doing. The other one is the scaling up of the existing rural and urban safety programs. If you see in our case, we have a base safety net program, productive safety net program in Africa, in which we have a development agent at a grassroots level, at household level, who are assisting the farmers in the urban society as well. And finally, what has to be done to tackle this issue, from my view, is, there must be investment to overcome, to get what you expect from the sector. There must be a secure and selected investment. In this regard, the country may have different option of investment, but in our case, we identify 3 areas which may be an experience for the other country. We identify the major food grains, which shortly we can cover the food security problem. And also we identify the horticulture sector in which we can intervene. And finally, we focus on the livestock products like dairy, which shortly can catch up with the problems. This way we try to, focus in the short run. In the long run, whenever there is pandemic, what country must learn from it, according to my view, they need to see what the institutional capacity looks like. What can we cope up with any pandemic that's rising? Every pandemic must teach us one lesson so that we can cope up. So in long run, governments need to think about the institutional capacity and the system building at the second point. And maybe in our case, we figure out also, when you look into the economy mostly rely on agriculture, which holds for most of the African country. and almost 18% rely on agriculture. So in that case, we need to think about the structural context of our agriculture also. We figure out that, our agriculture mainly deal with the smallholder, but we need to think about modernizing agriculture together with the private sector engagement. That's also what we are recruiting at, a learning lesson during this pandemic. So they are a part of the business right now also, but in the future, there must be a balance between the smallholder, the poor who are not efficient in production, and the private sector who has capacity, technology, and the resource as well. These are some of the challenges that we are figuring out, and that's how we are also plan to intervene, which maybe the other countries also experience. Thank you very much. This is a good question, actually. In the point which I mentioned earlier, I mentioned about whenever there's pandemic, the government need to think about the next step, how they can cope up with the issues. For me, the pandemic generates shocks in many terms, but we need to see three areas which should not be bypassed in this session. The first one for me is the supply shock. That's what we figured out at the country. Production shutdown will affect the supply chain, and there is disruption at the country. So this affects production, generating negatively. And this will maybe not end there. The supply shock never end there. And it leads us to the second point, which is the demand shock. So the demand shock will be created. The demand shock also affects, the firms' demand for inputs, which consequently leads the consumers, challenge of spending structure from what we know previously. So primarily the supply shock will be created, then followed by the demand, and finally we end up with the financial shock. This is how we try to analyze in our case, and maybe it holds for some other African and even in the global as standard. So in our case, we try to identify these fundamental initiatives to overcome supply shock. If we, focus on the supply shock and cover the whole value chain of the supply, I think we can cure from the demand shock and the financial shock as well. In most of the African countries, which may hold for undeveloped nation, is, our production efficiency is very low. So we need to focus on supply. To just focus on supply, we need to know our demand range as well. What really we demand. If you take as an example our care, we Ethiopian, we import like a big amount of wheat every year from different countries. But when this shock comes, we realize that cannot be continued as, like medical equipment is happening. So we try to figure out what potential we have in the country. And now we have an initiative which is very crucial. The intervention must be, as I told you earlier, the grain. From the grain, we also select the wheat, which we are importing, and focus on that. So the country has to focus on the comparative advantage they have internally, so that they can, come up with the food security problem and maybe support the country next to them or whoever demand the support. So we just plan to fully utilize the arable land that we have in the country. And we also not only focus on the smallholder, we also initiate the private sectors who are working in the economic sector, support them financially. We even provide them special loan, and also we give them time for repayment of the loan which is previously provided, and avoid the interest even. Such encouragements are there to just secure the sector and increase the production as well. In most cases, the problem of labor is there, but in Ethiopia, we try to, encourage the labor part so that the firms, mainly small and the medium enterprises, should not queue the labor. They may decrease, even though they decrease and the labor is seated home, work turn by turn, we never queue the salary of those laborers. Obviously, according to the national planning, there is around 1.6 million, jobless people because of this. But we try to increase the efficiency of the worker and encourage the firms so that they can own their own, activity, and they should not cut the supply, which has a consequence on the demand as well. This is how we are working in the sector, but that does not mean it's free of problem. But working in such a way may cure. Focus on the supply side is crucial. That's what I'm recommending even for the country like us. Thank you very much. This is also still a good question, which I was expecting from you. The answer is yes. I believe any crisis never come up without opportunity. But what matters is how we can figure out the opportunity out of that crisis. It's yes because agriculture is for those here never to be in the position that we need, and people are inclining toward high-tech technology, ignoring agriculture, and even need health quality without engaging agriculture, without nutrition. But we bypass a lot of things to be done in agriculture. So I think this is a good opportunity to understand what missing element is there in our move toward the technology or the IT era. Unless it's accompanied by the whole economy and that there is backward and forward leakage, everybody has to realize that it costs us in the way it costs today. So it's yes, because if you take in our case, we explore, under this pandemic, we figure out that we get an opportunity of, export. Under pandemic, our export increased after 5 years tremendously. We realized that, we didn't tap the potential that we have. Even though the people are, resides home and most of the people are not actively engaged in the workplace, the consumption of specifically some of the exportable products are getting high. The demand is there. So we believe that it needs some strategic intervention for some of the exportable commodities. And also we learned that you can't rely on any other country unless you have, a balanced approach. For instance, as I mentioned earlier, we are importing in billions of dollars every year wheat from abroad. But under this situation, we realize that it's not easy to get those products from that country because every country demands what you demand. So it's always very critical to look into the balance of, looking into the potential you have in home and under what comparative advantage you look for, having something from abroad as well. And also you have to have a plan B. What if, what you are looking for is not working. So this is, an opportunity for the country to look into the potential they have in the country and what they can share for the world as well. For instance, Ethiopian coffee is one of the non-export products. We got, I can't tell you in the last month of like 3-4 months, we never export in the history of 5 to 10 years the way we were exporting. This means there is some other opportunity for some other country as well. So we need to, focus on the strategic issue. We learned that the country has to also, learn from even such a situation. There is also another milestone that I can figure out in the way we're working on the finance. In any economy, what matters is, among the factor of production, land in the finance is a determinant role. We have land, but we never look to the finance side of the economy. I think that's what we are lacking in the whole value chain of the market, infrastructure for the market. Even though the opportunity is there for export in all over the world, what do infrastructure have in the country matters. So this give an assignment for the whole government. What's the missing element that I have to work? What element I have been jumping so that my economy will be stuck somewhere? This is how we are, trying to evaluate and identify. I hope some of the government action right now in Ethiopia is, everybody realize that we can't bypass some of the major issues in the economic sector, likely in agriculture. In the country which rely almost fully, like 80% on the agriculture, like us. So finance get an attention, mechanization get an attention, modernization, irrigation, not relying on the rain, relying on the groundwater and the rivers is getting an attention this time. So every country has to explore the potential inside. So for me, as a country, like the second populated in Africa, we realize that we will be victim if we overlook those issues. And it become an opportunity for agriculture sector to look into some of the policy change. So generally, I believe this is a good opportunity for the sectors which is overlooked, like agriculture, or not fully given an attention. And if institutions change in such situation, I hope it will be a base for the future, even after COVID response. COVID may go sooner or later, but the problem is what does it take or what does it gives us? That matter for me. Is it? That's how I can reflect to the lessons that we learned from the COVID.